We are on page 564. We're taking a look at Parashat Pekudei. This is we're getting to the end of our tabernacle construction, and we're getting to the end of the book of Exodus. This is the final parsha in the book of Exodus. It's more often than not, it is read as a double parsha with Vayakel, which we did yesterday. So Vayakel Pekudei is fairly common double parsha. This year, in part because it's a leap year, we've got that extra Adar. We're spacing things out a little bit more. You may have noticed if you were astutely paying attention yesterday in our Shabbat service that there was a little bit of mix-up, a little bit of confusion about how to break up the aliyot, which is I'm happy to accept responsibility for that. I should have done a better job communicating. But as I was sort of doing sort of after action, trying to figure out what went wrong. So the law committee, the conservative movement's law committee, just passed a couple of years ago a new tshuva breaking down what to do in a situation where you have read the entire parsha, because it's a double parsha and you've read the whole thing in the first 2 years. What do you do when it comes around and it's not a double parsha in the third year? And it's a confusing issue it's sort of one place where the triennial cycle gets completely thrown out of whack. And the response is, basically the response is read whatever you want. And so some people say, oh, well, let's just start at the beginning. Others say, let's do the last third to sort of, mimic the fact that we're in the final third year of the triennial cycle. There was a bit of a confusion because of that, but that's what's going on here. My point in telling you this is that this usually gets combined with the parsha from last week and the conversation from last week, which is about the actual physical construction of the tabernacle, and we see that we had our parshiot about God's instruction. We have our parsha about the actual deed, the act thereof, and then we have this that begins. It's almost like a receipt. It's almost like from Home Depot. It says, these are the records of the tabernacle of the pact, which were drawn up at Moses' bidding, the work of the Levites under the direction of Itamar, son of Aaron, the priest. Now Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, had made all that the Lord had commanded Moses. At his side was Oholiab, son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan, carver and designer and embroiderer in blue, purple, and crimson yarns, and in fine linen. So, what's going on here? Why do we need to talk about this? Haven't we already talked about this? What is the point of drilling down so much? We received the instruction, and then we did it, and now we're getting a sort of summary of the fact that we did it. It seems to be inordinately important to the biblical author. I talked about this a little bit in my Devar Torah yesterday, but I'd love to hear some other points of view. Why do you think we have this receipt, for lack of a better term? Why do we have this Pekudei HaMishkan, the records of the tabernacle?
I was wondering yesterday whether there wasn't, especially because of the Haftarah, where there wasn't a bit of back and forth and accountability with the Kohanim, to make sure that everybody kind of knew what they had and where it should be, like the Kohanim are just holding this in trust for the people as a whole. That's what I kind of got out of it.
Yeah. I think that's a great perspective. That this is we're sort of this is it's not so much a receipt as much as it is sort of like a detailed invoice. Here's what we did. Here's the work that we did, and it's to hold everyone to account. And you can see here that there are multiple people being kind of name checked here to emphasize the accountability, that this is being done as Moses commanded, and it is being directed by Itamar, who is the son of Aaron. So the Kohanim are in charge of the construction project, and Betzalel, who is from the tribe of Judah, and Oholiab, who is of the tribe of Dan, they are tasked with the craftsmanship of the project. And so there are sort of multiple points of accountability, multiple sources like I said, accountability. Yeah, Steve.
Okay, so I'm reading that, and it basically says accountability, but no project that I know of never has cost overruns. Okay,
Right.
So this particular project did not have cost overruns. In fact, they might have been very efficient. So what did they do with the extra money, the extra silver, the extra thread? Did they give back to distribute amongst the people?
That's a great question. We I tell you what, let's save that for what's going to come next, because I think that's a fantastic question. Because we saw in last week's Parsha that when the time came to build this, that Moses told the people, like, here's the list of things we need, and then they all started showing up with them, and then it got to a point where Moses said, this is more than enough. We don't need any more material. And so that's that's a great question. What happened to the extra material? To me, the big question that I find myself asking in that moment is, why did they have all that stuff to begin with? I mean, who flees their homeland? Who flees as a refugee and grabs a big bundle of dye or a bunch of olive oil or something? They were told to leave with some things, and they made a point of sort of getting their back wages from the Egyptians. Some of these things no conceivable person would ever flee Egypt with, like a 8-foot long beam. You're not.
You don't know me very well, because I would.
I did see, God bless them. I saw a picture on the internet yesterday of a man fleeing Ukraine with his desktop computer. That this was his prized possession, and I said, oh, I can see doing that. Like I've been there. Yeah, of course he wants to keep his PC. Yeah.
I just want to say, anything that I would have took that I didn't need, I would have took the Kimmel scrap iron and metal.
Oh, there you go.
I don't know if you heard me.
I don't know if he heard you.
I can't hear very well.
Here, Steve, why don't you?
And Steve has a booming voice, so please.
I said that, Rabbi made a comment about, why would people take what they really don't need? And I said that I would take it that he didn't know me very well. And I said that plus I would have took it to Kimmel scrap metal and iron and got rid of it over there.
All right. Today's Parsha class is sponsored by. All right, let's jump back into the text there. Oh, please go ahead.
No, I was just saying we support our own.
Oh, that's true.
Absolutely.
All right, let's begin back here, verse 24. All the gold that was used for the work and all the work of the sanctuary, the elevation offering of gold, came to 29 talents and 730 shekels by the sanctuary weight. The silver of those of the community who were recorded came to 100 talents and 1,775 shekels by the sanctuary weight, a half shekel a head, half a shekel by the sanctuary weight for each one who was entered in the records. From the age of 20 years up, 603,550 men. The 100 talents of silver were used for casting the sockets of the sanctuary, and the sockets for the curtain, 100 sockets to 100 talents, a talent, a socket. And the 1,775 shekels. He made hooks for the posts, overlaid for their tops, and bands around them. All right, so that's like a lot of math that we're not gonna worry about, especially here. But to me, there are a few things that stand out when we're looking at this. One is back in verse 24. The gold is described as zahav hatnufa, the elevation offering of gold. And this is sort of left unexplained, but it seems to be implying here that the items used in the construction of the tabernacle are themselves an offering, are themselves a sacrifice. So in a time to come, you'll be able to make an offering at the tabernacle and later at the temple, but the tabernacle itself is an offering and does what an offering does. Some of you might remember last Shavuot we had a talk during our tikkun about the tenufa, the how do they translate it here? The elevation offering, sometimes translated as the heave offering or the wave offering. This was an important ritual of the harvest, and here it's not a harvest, but it is gold is being given, and it's being given in a way that has a sort of ritual component and presumably some spiritual aspect to it. So the shekels we use as a sort of modern Israeli shekel, so not really equivalent. And a talent of gold or silver isn't really a measure that we are going to be familiar with, but suffice it to say, it's a lot. It's a massive amount. If you lived in the ancient world and you had a talent of gold, you were set. You were going to be doing all right. And we see so the gold comes in a way that's not entirely explained. The gold is offered as needed, it would seem. The silver is offered a half shekel a head, according to what we read in the beginning of Parashat Kitisa, and sort of coincidentally what we read in the Maftir yesterday, that this is the time to get your half shekel ready, or it would have been. And so if you add up all the half shekels of 603,550 men, you get 100 talents and 1,775 shekels according to the math they do. So I did the math once. I can't remember it, but I remember it working out. I remember it working out just fine. But this is notable because this is the exact same number that shows up time after time after time. We sometimes speak of 600,000 people who came out of Egypt. The exact number given in the Torah is this number here, 603,550. And again, that's military age men. It doesn't include women. It doesn't include the elderly. It doesn't include children. And so probably total 2.5–3 million people, something along those lines. And the rabbis note how odd it is. We're going to be told later that the entire generation is supposed to die off in the wilderness, and they do die off in the wilderness, and they're succeeded by the next generation, the generation that will go into the land with Joshua. But there, at the end of the story, at the end of the Torah story, we get the same number, the exact same number, 603,550 men. And so there's something profound going on there with that number. There's something intensely symbolic, and it may have been lost to the sands of time. It's unclear to me exactly why that number is so important to the author, but it is an important author. And the rabbis note it seems pretty unlikely that you would have one generation die and the next generation be born, and it would be the exact same number of people. So there's something sort of miraculous about this, perhaps literally miraculous, or perhaps it's akin to a miracle. But again, I I'm not going to claim to have any deeper understanding of that number. But it's definitely interesting. All right. Any thoughts about that? Should we keep going? All right. So we're at verse 29. The copper from the elevation offering came to 70 talents and 2,400 shekels. Of it, he made the sockets for the entrance of the tent of meeting, the copper altar and its copper grating, and all the utensils of the altar, the sockets of the enclosure round about, and the sockets of the gate of the enclosure, and all the pegs of the tabernacle, and all the pegs of the enclosure round about. So this isn't worth belaboring too much, but it is, from my point of view, it's interesting to see what are the things being made of copper, what are the things being made of silver, and being made of gold, and to think about why. And you see here a very sort of practical balance where gold is very expensive. Obviously, it was expensive in the ancient world, and it's heavy. It's pretty heavy. There you can do really cool things with it, though. You can make it very thin. You can make it very thin, very flat. But you wouldn't want to build something entirely out of gold. It'd just be prohibitively heavy. But even when you build something out of gold or out of silver, it's liable for bending. It's not the sturdiest material. Copper, or probably nechoshet here, probably means bronze. This is probably not raw, unadulterated copper. This is copper mixed with tin. This is the end of the Bronze Age, after all. And it's a much sturdier material. And so that's why you would make sockets for the entrance. That's why you would make tent pegs out of bronze. It's a much sturdier material. It will survive the wear and tear of daily use better than silver, better than gold. All right. Pardon me. We'll keep going. We're on chapter 39. It says, of the blue, purple, crimson yarns, they also made the service vestments for officiating in the sanctuary. They made Aaron's sacral vestments as the Lord had commanded Moses. The ephod was made of gold, blue, purple, and crimson yarn and fine twisted linen. They hammered out sheets of gold and cut threads to be worked into designs among the blue, the purple, and the crimson yarns and the fine linen. They made for it, attaching the shoulder pieces. They were attached at its two ends. The decorated band that was upon it was made like it, of one piece with it, of gold, blue, purple, and crimson yarns and fine twisted linen, as the Lord had commanded Moses. So we talked about this a little bit in a previous class when we received the instructions for how to make this. And we see now that it is being made. It is being made according to the instructions. And you can ask. We've asked this before. It might be worth pondering again. Why, in a text that is otherwise so sparse, are we obsessing over the detailed instructions twice? We're told to do it, and then in a lot of detail, and then we're told that it was done in a lot of detail. And it would have been just so easy to write. As what they did right here, verse 1, as the Lord commanded Moses, and then you stop. That's it. If you want to see the details of what that means, turn back to a previous chapter. But if we don't need to go into all this again. And yet here it is. Here it is in a lot of detail. Once again, how to make the clothing for Aaron and for all of the priests and high priests that will serve after him.
I was thinking something with what you'd asked before. It's like these were the things that the people donated, and it's human nature to kind of want to know what became of your donations. And so, people who gave, let's say, copper could, point to whatever, and, say to the kids, hey, see that peg there? We gave that. I mean, even if it's not exactly, it's like you feel a sense of ownership because, it's like, okay, we donated all of that, but now we see what it became.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. This is much later, but in Second Temple times, there is a dispute between the Kohanim who run the temple and some of the rabbis, and presumably some of the people as well, because the Kohanim decided that when you bring an animal to be sacrificed, you'll bring it, they'll do the sacrifices, and you will get some meat. It could be from any of the animals they sacrificed that day, but you're going to get some meat back. And the rabbis said, no, people bring their animal, they should get back the meat from their animal. They want to know what became of their donation. There needs to be a tangible connection. You see this sometimes in when charities, when they like they run an orphanage or something like that, and you'll get a thing in the mail telling you about one boy. You've sponsored one boy at the orphanage with your donation. The reality is you haven't sponsored one boy with your donation. You've helped with the cost to run the entire organization. And they're just using this one child as an example. But yeah, people want to know what became of their donation. I think that's a really profound point. Thank you. All right, so we've talked about this before, but I want to emphasize that there is something sort of, this moment feels removed from time to me. And the reason I say that is because this moment, it feels like it wouldn't make a lot of sense in the context of the situation. Now, specifically what I mean by that is this is a huge project for people who are in the desert, who are in the wilderness, who are sort of isolated from the world at large, who they don't have permanent homes, they don't have permanent places of business, they're not going to have their shop, they're not going to have their blacksmith tools or anything like that. And yet we're asking them to build this elaborate construction project and to make these clothes that sort of assume a settled life, a settled existence. Linen is not the domain of nomadic people. Nomads can't really make linen. You need a farm, you need to grow the flax, and you need to stay in one place while you turn the flax into linen. It's a very complex process. And we see here the various dyes which come in different ways and have to be manufactured in different ways. And further, when we're going to look at the stones that are made for the breastplate, this all, I mean, there's a few ways to read it. One is that they just had all this stuff with them. They brought it out of Egypt, which is possible. Although, the linen wears down over time and sort of introduces another problem that gets answered later, actually, in the book of Deuteronomy, where it says it's one of the miracles of the generation in the wilderness that their clothes didn't wear out, that somehow they were able to go 40 years without a change of clothes, and they didn't need one. But either they brought it all with them, or they're not so detached from the worldwide economy, from the international trade routes as we might have imagined that they are, or that all of this was just somehow miraculously available, which is an option. That is something the rabbis talk about, that some of these more obscure, hard to source items were provided for in the wilderness. They just sort of they existed specifically for the purpose of the construction of the Mishkan. All right. What's going on over there? Children are chanting here, but I'm sure it's fine. All right. We'll keep going here on verse 6. They bordered the lazuli stones with frames of gold, engraved with seal engravings of the names of the sons of Israel. They were set on the shoulder pieces of the ephod as stones of remembrance for the Israelites, as the Lord had commanded Moses. The breastplate was made in the style of the ephod of gold, blue, purple, crimson yarn, fine twisted linen. It was square. They made the breastpiece doubled, a span in length and a span in width doubled. They set it 4 rows of stones. The first row was a row of carnelian, chrysolite, emerald, second row turquoise, sapphire, and amethyst. Third row a jacinth and agate and a crystal. And the fourth row a beryl, a lapis lazuli, and a jasper. We talked in a previous class about how we're doing our very best with some of these stones, but some of these are a little obscure. They were encircled in their mountings with frames of gold. The stones corresponded in number to the names of the sons of Israel, 12 corresponding to their names, engraved like seals, each with its name for the 12 tribes. So this is something that we've talked about before, but let's tell you what. Let's jump back to verse 9 here, because this is what captures my attention, and I don't think we talked about this last time. Even though it did come up in the previous parsha, but where we say, describing this hoshen, this breast piece, they say it was square. They made the breast piece doubled. So you can ask the question, what does that mean? What does it mean to say it's square and it's doubled? Does that mean you have a square, you have another square, you put them together? Well, that's not a square anymore, right? That's a rectangle. It's quite clear that that's not happening also, because they describe a span in length and a span in width. Okay, so it's a square, but doubled. My thought about this, and I'm open to other interpretations, but my impression of this is that it is a square, and then you have another square, and they're connected with this yarn that's being described here, so that you wear it over your shoulders, so that you've got one square on the front and one square on the back, connected by this fine twisted linen. And in fact, that's generally typically how it's portrayed in artistic depictions. But yeah, I'd say it's a little unclear. All right. Any thoughts about this, or questions, concerns, clarifications? All right, so I try as best I can to make this class really focus on the pshat, on the plain meaning of the text here. I think there's usually enough to talk about in the pshat, but it's worth noting here, especially since we've already talked about this, that there's a lot of conversation in the later sources about the deeper meaning of these objects, of these items, because it's very clear that the clothing is a very important part of the role of the priest, the role of the high priest. The clothing that they wear seems to be an essential element of the ritual. You can't just show up in your workday clothes. You can't just show up wearing your gym shorts or something. But the question is why? Why does it really matter what you wear? I mean, part of me wants to push back and say, well, of course not. I don't judge people based on what they wear. I don't really care. I'm not a fashion icon, as you can tell. It's pretty I'm pretty indifferent to the clothing people wear. But the rabbis say that in this particular case, all of these items are standing in for the Jewish people, and specifically for the shortcomings of the Jewish people. So everything the high priest wears, he is essentially wearing the sins of Israel, which is not necessarily what you would expect. That you might imagine the high priest needs to go into this sort of ritual, needs to go into the Holy of Holies with a clean slate. But in fact, it's the opposite. The high priest needs to step in with all of our mess, needs to step in and do all of these rituals and seek forgiveness for our transgressions, completely covered in them, literally wearing all of our mistakes. And so when you see the names carved, the names of the tribes, or the sons of Israel rather, carved into these objects, these items, it's that Aaron walks in with all of us, in a sense. Aaron walks in with all of our mess, and that's an essential part of the ritual. That's an essential part of the tshuva. All right, we'll keep going here. Verse 15. On the breastpiece, they made braided chains of corded work in pure gold. They made 2 frames of gold, 2 rings of gold, and fastened the 2 rings at the 2 ends of the breastpiece, attaching the 2 golden cords to the 2 rings at the ends of the breastpiece. They then fastened the 2 ends of the cords to the 2 frames, attaching them to the shoulder pieces of the ephod at the front. They made 2 rings of gold and attached them to the 2 ends of the breastpiece. At its inner edge, which faced the ephod, they made the 2 other rings of gold and fastened them on the front of the ephod, low on the 2 shoulder pieces, close to its seam above the decorated band. The breastpiece was held in place by a cord of blue from its rings to the rings of the ephod, so that the breastpiece rested on the decorated band. It did not come loose from the ephod, as the Lord had commanded. So we spoke about the ephod in a previous class also, that this was an item of sort of I got a little pushback from a congregant who said you need to stop using the word magic. So I use the word magic very intentionally. From a sociological point of view, from a comparative religion point of view, there's very little distinguishing between a lot of what you see in the Tanakh with magic. It cannot be distinguished either in practice or in purpose. When the Torah tells us not to engage in magic, not to engage in witchcraft, it is speaking of a sort of limited set of activities that you shouldn't be doing, but the rest of it, it's not. It's a difference in I mean, that's really all I could say, is that it's a difference in degree, not a difference in kind. But yeah, so the
Rabbi?
Oh, please go ahead.
Could you explain in more detail kind of that distinction? Because
yeah, sure. So tell you what, I'll explain with the ephod. I think the ephod is a good example. So we see in other places in the Tanakh that the ephod seems to have the ability to discern the will of God, and the ephod has a sort of magical power to advise the leaders of the Jewish people, not unlike the Urim and Tumim that are going to also be worn by the high priest. And the ephod is a device for understanding the will of God. It's there are moments where it's used correctly, there are moments where it's used incorrectly, and scholars of ancient Near Eastern religions point to the fact that there's basically no difference here between the ephod and what people used, what the kings used in Mesopotamia, what the kings used in Egypt and the Hittite areas. There were always in every group of people there were people whose job it was to discern the will of the gods, and there were people whose job it was to advise the king. And if it didn't work out, this is a pretty high stakes situation. And our text, our Torah text, our Tanakh, doesn't look especially different from those other texts in a lot of places. I think that's probably surprising to hear. But in many ways, King David, King Solomon, they act in very similar ways to their neighbors. I mean, there are differences, there are distinctions, but the differences are sort of probably overemphasized, truth be told. Yes, Steve.
Okay, so when I was looking up, and I know they can't hear me, so
I'll repeat, of course. Yeah.
But when I was looking up and trying to figure out what I was going to say prior to Torah yesterday,
Mhm.
I came across a word that I was never heard of called a bas or a bast,
Mhm.
where it's some sort of encryption that is an ancient Israeli or Hebrew encryption that they use. So they talk about the gematria. So,
Right,
so
right.
if you look at this word, the phone,
Mhm.
and you look at the gematria of that,
Yeah.
is there anything special about that that ties it into what you were saying about some of the other mysticism or the other items?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I don't know any off the top of my head. I'm doing the math in my head right now. Ephod is 85 and high ephod is 90. It's yeah, no, nothing stands out, I'm afraid. But yeah, it was a question about gematria. There's often interesting things, although the rabbis also warn, like, you know, you can plug anything into anything else and see what happens, and there ought to be a limit to how many of those you do. But yeah, this is tell you what, let's keep going here, because there are some interesting things here that we didn't have time to get to before. So all right. So the robe for the ephod was made of woven work, pure blue. The opening of the robe in the middle of it was like the opening of a coat of mail, with a binding around the opening so that it would not tear. On the hem of the robe, they made pomegranates of blue, purple, and crimson yarns twisted. They also made bells of pure gold and attached the bells between the pomegranates, all around the hem of the robe, between the pomegranates, a bell and a pomegranate, a bell and a pomegranate, all around the hem of the robe for officiating in, as the Lord had commanded Moses. So this is, you know, describing the robe that the high priest wears, and also, you know, sort of going into detail on its hem. The hem of the robe has these things. It's got bells, and it's got pomegranates. Now it's a decorative pomegranate, and it's being decorated with these colors of yarn. And you can sort of ask, you know, what's going on here? Why would you do this? The bells, it's gonna produce an interesting effect. You can imagine someone walking around with bells on their clothing. They're not going to be able to sneak in anywhere. They're gonna produce a sort of a constant small sound as they walk. And it's to me, this is one of the coolest things. I always love when something like this happens, and I'm hopeful that it'll happen more and more. We actually have one of these bells, believe it or not. I mean, you can't prove it. You can't prove 100% that it was a bell from the robe of the high priest, but we have archaeologists found in the city of David in Jerusalem, just outside the Temple Mount, found this little golden bell. It must have fallen off of someone's robe a few thousand years ago, and it was just sitting there waiting to be discovered. Like I say, it doesn't have, there's nothing written on it that says like this belongs to the high priest or something like that. But it is a tiny little golden bell, exactly as you might imagine would fit this description that goes on the hem of the high priest robe. And so, it was just sitting there buried under dirt for thousands of years, waiting to be discovered. And it was discovered a few years ago. So the pomegranates themselves are probably a way of a way of distinguishing or signifying wealth. And it's hard to understand from our point of view because we live in such a materially rich society that so much of the conversation in the Torah and in Tanakh around possessions, around material goods, seems quite foreign to us because we throw out things every day that these people would consider their treasured possessions. And so it's one thing to make a robe, it's another thing to make a robe and then decorate the bottom of it, the hem of it, with these tiny little balls that are made out of cloth of different kinds of color. The yarn is blue, purple, and crimson, all twisted together. And it's completely decorative. It has no purpose, it has no function other than to signify the huge amount of money, of time, of resources that goes into making this object. And it's simply there to look beautiful. It's simply there to add to the beauty of the occasion. Many people point to tzitzit as having the same function. That the origin of tzitzit comes from the idea that you would make a piece of clothing because you need it, right? I mean, we all need to wear something. And in the ancient world, they needed to wear something, and it was comparatively more of their time and money went into making clothing. We don't really worry about clothing in the way that they had to. If you make something and you're just going to make the bare minimum, just what you need. But if you want to show off a little bit, if you've got more wealth, if you've got more resources, you might make a piece of clothing and then stick some extra things on it, throw a little extra bit on it. And that's what putting fringes on the corners would do. It would signify that you have a little bit of wealth. You have, it is an expression of abundance, and especially to put the techelet on the tzitzit would signify this is a wealthy person we're looking at. And so here you probably see something similar. All right, we'll keep going. They made the tunic of fine linen, of woven work for Aaron and his sons, and the headdress of fine linen, the decorated turbans of fine linen, the linen breeches of fine twisted linen, the sashes of fine twisted linen, purple, blue, crimson yarns done in embroidery, as the Lord had commanded Moses. They made the frontlet for the holy diadem of pure gold. So that's a good guess for what that means. The Hebrew is, you can see here, Vasu et tzitz nezer hakodesh zahav tahor. Tzitz is translated here as frontlet, but that's just a best guess. I mean, it's sort of in the context trying to figure out what this might be. It's a little bit unclear. And incised upon it the seal inscription, holy to the Lord. So they wrote on it, Kodesh Lashem, holy to the Lord. And they attached to it a cord of blue to fix it upon the headdress above, as the Lord had commanded Moses. You see this in later prophecy that it's in who is it? Malachi. Yeah, in Malachi, there is a description of a coming age, sort of points to a messianic age, although Malachi doesn't use that term, in which everything in Jerusalem is going to have holy to the Lord written on it. That everything connected to the holy city will be like this frontlet, will be like this holy diadem the high priest wears. It says, thus was completed all the work of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting. The Israelites did so just as the Lord had commanded Moses. So they did. And so we already heard that, right? Like, again, we're really emphasizing, we're really drilling down. This is done exactly the way it was supposed to be done. We're following the exact instructions, and we did it. We did it. We finished it. We succeeded. Then they brought the tabernacle to Moses with the tent and all its furnishings, its clasps, its planks, its bars, its posts, its sockets, the covering of tanned ram skins, the covering of dolphin skins, the curtain of the screen, the ark of the pact and its poles, and the cover, the table and all its utensils, the bread of display, the pure lampstand, its lamps in due order, all its fittings, and the oil for lighting, the altar of gold, the oil for anointing, the aromatic incense, and the screen for the entrance of the tent, the copper altar with its copper grating, its poles and all its utensils, and the laver in its stand, the hanging of the enclosures, its posts and its sockets, the screen for the gate of the enclosure, its cords and its pegs, all the furnishings for the service of the tabernacle, the tent of meeting. All right, so that was a lot, right? That's an enormous list. And you can imagine in the ancient world, this is a truly enormous list of things to have. This is just so much stuff. You know, if you've ever spent time in yeshiva, you probably studied Elu Mitziot, which is a section of the Talmud that deals with the mitzvah to return lost objects. And you can see when you study that there is a great amount of emphasis on returning lost objects because there just weren't as many objects in the ancient world. You know, there's a great amount of concern. What happens to a plank of wood? What, you know, if I find a plank of wood, am I allowed to keep it? Do I have to figure out who it belongs to? What should I do with this plank of wood that I find? Today, you drive by a plank of wood on the side of the road. No one would stop for it. I don't want to say no one. There are probably some people who would, but most people wouldn't. But here you see just enormous list of items. And the reason I bring this up again is that there is a great amount of debate among scholars about when this text was written and why. So, you know, the traditional belief, of course, is that this is put down by Moses shortly after the events in question. But most scholars describe this as being part of what's called the P source. P stands for priestly, and the P source is especially interested in the rituals of the tabernacle, the sacrifices. We're going to see a lot of the P source in Leviticus. Leviticus is almost all P source, and and there's a debate about, was this written in the time of the first temple? Was it written during the Babylonian captivity? Was it written early in the period of the second temple? And no one, there's no scholarly consensus about that. But there's a great amount of debate also, even among people who do say that the later date is the more likely one, which that's the majority opinion. And like I say, there's absolutely no consensus, but that's the majority opinion. But there's a great amount of debate about what the purpose of this text is. Does it come to sort of exist as a foreshadowing of the temple? The temple, the first temple, is it a foreshadowing of the second temple? Is it a call to build? Was this written before, after the exile had ended, we returned to the land of Israel, but we hadn't yet built the temple? We see this time period in some of the later prophets. Is this a call to build? Is the tabernacle merely a sort of literary device to describe the temple in the era of the wilderness, or does it stand in as its own alternative to the temple? Are there people at some point in our history who said, I don't actually think we need a temple? They didn't have a temple in the time of Moses and Aaron. They had this tent. They had this thing that they built, and it was plenty. It was enough. It was majestic. It was grand. Let me tell you about all the dolphin skins that were on it. And it was fine. We don't need to build a permanent abode for God because Moses and Aaron didn't have one, and they did just fine. So, like I say, there's no agreement among scholars. There's no consensus about what the P source is doing, why it's bringing what it brings, and what its ultimate goal is. But it's something to think about here as we are sort of obsessing about the construction of this tabernacle.
Could I ask one more question? I know.
Absolutely.
And I have been wondering about the golden calf and the odd juxtaposition, or maybe it isn't odd, but maybe that's another answer to the question you posed. The golden calf happens, and then all of this comes in at this point. And, you know, it's very natural to say, is there a connection here between the fact that the people were yearning for something visible, something golden, something majestic in that way, in the Egyptian way, whatever, and that this came as a response to, no, this is our Jewish way of or Hebrew way, whatever. Because otherwise it seems like the big elephant in the room was the golden calf, and it came and went like a little breeze almost, and it was so cataclysmic. So I don't know. It's just like the golden calf and then all of this, and it's so weighty.
Yeah, no, I think you're 100% right. I think there are sort of different ways you can sort of point to that intersection. One, this is my preferred point of view. Just from a literary perspective, we have Moses on the mountain receiving specific instructions about how to build the tabernacle. And some of the instructions include the phrase, as I will show you, or as I have showed you. And so there's some sort of there's some sort of, you know, audiovisual component to what Moses is receiving. It's entirely possible that the people could see some of that in the distance. They were down below, they were looking up and seeing what was going on, and they saw the tabernacle, and they saw the cherubim, and they saw the Ark of the Covenant, and they said, "Oh, that's what God's saying to do, is build something like that." But because they were seeing it in the distance, they thought Moses had died. They built their best approximation of it, and so that was the golden calf. That's more of a literary answer, but I think it's a powerful one. In terms of like a linguistic answer, it's notable that we have very specific instructions about what not to do. You're not supposed to build an idol, and then God gets real mad when we build a golden calf. We see a detailed instruction about how the golden calf is made. It's made, the gold is made with a stylus, and then we get equally detailed instructions about how to build the Ark of the Covenant and the cherubim. And it's a different way of manufacturing. It's a different way of gold. There's actually two different words used in the Exodus version of the Ten Commandments and the Deuteronomy version about the how you don't make an idol. You know, it says don't make an idol. And it's usually translated in Exodus, don't make a molten idol, and in Deuteronomy, don't make a graven idol. Well, those aren't the same thing. And some people have pointed to the golden calf as being the sort of proximate cause for the instruction not to make molten idol, and the cherubim are not molten. It's sort of more like a gold leaf that's being done. But yeah, it's definitely, there's definitely on a sort of big picture perspective an intense connection between, the people desire something physical, they desire something that they can look at, something tangible, and so they build this golden calf, and God, sort of in response to their human nature, says, here's how we're going to do it. There's so much more I could say. This goes into the history of the Northern Kingdom and the Southern Kingdom and this sort of thing. We don't have time, unfortunately. But Joanna, you've asked a fabulous question. There's a lot of intersection there. Absolutely.
I would love to maybe have a one-time class on the magic issue. What's good
That's a nice idea.
at magic.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know that there was a rabbinic literature on that, but that's something that always comes up in my mind with a lot of different references throughout the Torah.
The Talmud describes in detail magic that you can do and magic that you shouldn't do. And there's, most Jews today would probably be fairly uncomfortable hearing about all of the options for magical rituals that you can engage in. And then there's questions about, what has a sort of magical element implicit. Waving the lulav is a great example. Do we do it because it's magic, or do we do it because it's connecting us to God, or we do it simply in obedience to a mitzvah? It's a great question, and we could and we should make a class around that. That'd be a great class. All right, thank you all for coming, folks. I know this one's a little dense, but we have finished the book of Exodus, and now we're going to move into the book of Leviticus, which can also be a little dense, but I hope you'll join me. One of my rabbis used to say, this is the best book in the Torah, Leviticus. Steve.
There was still not much of it. Oh, there was
Thank
still,
you.
as dense as this is, which I don't think it's that dense, there's still a lot to unpack. But what I'm always fascinated by it is how what we read in Torah can still apply to what we see in modern times. And I'll give you a really good example. So we talked about the vestments as being symbolic of the sins of the Jewish people. So I had to think back to something. So about 3 years ago, I went to watch the Los Angeles Dodgers game in LA. And every team has these mascots.
Right. Yeah.
Well, their mascot was a food group. It had this horrendous looking creature with everything that they sold at their concession stand that was bad for you attached to it. So so it was really bizarre. And I'm thinking, is that like some sort, who came up with that? Somebody. So I just thought it was the strangest thing. So
it's an interesting message. I mean, like, they're trying to get their sales up, but do I really want to think about the fact that I'm becoming those nachos for, you are what you eat, right?
They were like, the onion rings were like 1,700 calories. Okay, they had that, plastered on it. It was, and I never really thought about it, but maybe somebody came up and says, this is how we cleanse ourselves of.
There you go.
So I just thought it was great.
Cleansing is big in LA.
Yeah.
All right. With that, I want to wish you all Shavua Tov. Have a great week, and we'll see you soon.